Welcome back to another installment of the Mortgage Mix podcast. I am Ralph.
And I'm Cherie.
And we're excited to have you all back here today to talk about the most recently released 2025 NextGen Homebuyer Report. So somebody who needs really no introduction to the Mortgage Mix podcast. We kind of joke around that she is a ongoing repeat guest for us, but we have the one and only Kristen Messerly with us. Hey, Kristen, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, we're always happy to have you back. So before we get started, just a quick reminder, just make sure that you are following the Mortgage Mix wherever you download your podcast. So that way you are always in tune when our latest podcast episodes launch or get released. In addition to that, make sure to follow us on YouTube as the video recordings of our podcasts are available on National MI's YouTube page. All right, so kind of getting started with the NextGen 2025 NextGen Homebuyer Report, which we are excited was released for the 5th consecutive year. So it kind of is an anniversary year, I would say. But we're excited to see some of the new things that have come out, but also maybe some of the things that have kind of remained the same and remain an issue for us. So Kristen, if you want to maybe just kind of get us started by just talking about what were some of the key takeaways? I love the report that kind of starts off, you give everybody top 10 takeaways right off the bat. What were some of the things that really stood out to you that, from this report, especially as we've evolved over the last 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, so it has been interesting. At this point, we've surveyed over 7,000 millennial and Gen Z consumers. One of the areas that we have tracked over the years has been trust in loan officers, trust in industry professionals. And one thing that was really astounding to me in 2021 was we found that there was this huge amount of distrust in lenders. It was like 1 in 3 said lenders were not trustworthy or reliable. And this year we've seen that, or it was 2 in 3, we've seen that jump now to 4 in 5. It was like only 19% said that they thought loan officers would help them make smart decisions about their mortgage. And of course, we've talked a lot about this, that creates an opportunity. I think it's not the worst thing in the world. It just tells us what consumers are thinking and feeling and gives loan officers then an opportunity to learn how to build trust, which I think leads to some of the other areas and data points that we found in the report. One being social media. YouTube has been consistently the go-to source for homebuyer education. So that's still a great way to build trust and provide education. Social media came up as, I think it was like 40% of Gen Z said they go to social media for homebuyer education, which I think is really interesting. And it was interesting to see some of the new platforms, new-ish. TikTok is not new, but we've seen that jump so much over the last year that it feels a lot more significant in this year's report. But what did show up as new, and this isn't necessarily social media, but it's technology usage, was the use of AI. And millennials and Gen Z are using ChatGPT and AI to help them along the home buying journey. That's important to know. Like, that's stuff that I think loan officers can help prompt them, like give them actual prompts to help them as they're going through that process. That builds trust to say, hey, I'm going to empower you as a consumer, that I know you want more information and education. The last area that I think is really insightful was around the lack of education in schools. So we've asked people in the past about childhood education around, whether they grew up learning about budgeting and that there was a big gender gap around that. But then we saw in schools, it was over 50%, I believe, that said that they didn't learn any financial literacy education in school. And then an additional like 30% or something around that said that it was either a small lesson or optional. So basically over 80% said that they didn't have any financial literacy education in high school. And so, of course, that's going to lead to some of the other data points around lack of confidence, lack of trust, lack of feeling that home ownership is even accessible. So there's some other things around, accessibility, affordability that I think would be interesting to touch on. But those were the big areas that I thought were most interesting.
Yeah, wow. So Cherie, I think we just got not just the Reader's Digest version, we just got the encyclopedia thrown at us.
A lot of good info.
Yeah.
But I heard a couple of common themes and stuff that we've all talked about quite a bit, which is trust and education. Just starting off with those two, what type of differences have we seen in trust? Because we saw, what was it, maybe 3 years ago, where trust really came out, or lack of trust in reality came out as something that's, oh my goodness, like, why aren't they trusting loan officers? Why? And I know that we've talked a lot about there's just a lot of distrust in the world today in general. So it doesn't really just fall on our industry. But how do we continue to try to curb this? Because we seem to be going, as much as we talk about it, we're going in the wrong direction. So how do we curb that and move that back to the right direction?
Yeah, I don't know that we are going to be able to make that turn. I think we're seeing distrust growing across, like you said, all different industries: media, healthcare, business, education, nonprofits, all of the areas, and financial institutions in general have lost a lot of trust. I think where we can build trust is through education, through empowering consumers with information to help them feel like they're able to make smart decisions for themselves. But what I think that distrust is going to be there. We've moved into an era of distrust, which is a title of a keynote I do a lot for you guys. But what I think is important around that is that then it creates that opportunity for someone to, like a loan officer or a lender or financial institution, to come in as what feels like a bright light in a dark space. So where there is distrust, if you are coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to walk you through this, or I'm providing a lot of the ambassadors at First Home IQ who really focus on building trust in their communities, they are talking about financial literacy as a holistic service. Like, they partner with financial advisors, they partner with all different kinds of providers to make sure that the consumer feels protected and cared for. And they're also giving them that information that's guiding them through the process from one to through beyond the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's big. And Cherie, like, I just think about from a sales perspective, you lead a sales team. And I think a lot of times, whether it's, us and mortgage insurance, or even loan officers out there, you're building trust. I think sometimes we may take for granted a little bit that, hey, yes, they need us. They need a mortgage from us. But think about the relationships you start establishing with your realtors, and how does that relationship start? So, Cherie, from a sales perspective, how would you and your team describe on how you build trust with your clients out there? Because I think that's a good start, if you will.
Yeah, I just think being in front of them and sharing information as much as possible, because there's so much misinformation that's out there, and home buyers today have so much headwinds against them. You have high interest rates, you have high home prices, you have insurance and taxes. So there's so much anxiety, and there's so much societal pressure for home buyers to buy a home, right? So you have that sense of pride, you have security, putting down roots, and creating that wealth. So it's sort of like a rite of passage for these home buyers to get into adulthood to own a home. So it's interesting. So you have so many programs that are out there that only require 3 to 5% as a down payment, but people think that you have to put 20% down. But if you put less than 20% down payment, we know you need mortgage insurance, and mortgage insurance makes home ownership affordable. So USMI just recently reported that it could take 27 years for a household earning median income to save for a 20% down payment plus closing costs. And that's for a medium priced home. Yeah. But in addition to making home ownership affordable, mortgage insurance also provides buying power. So let's take example, if you have a $500,000 home, to save up 20% would be $100,000. But if you were to just use a 5% down payment program, that's $25,000. So it's just more affordable, and it just allows you to get in and build those roots and start, building your wealth for homeowners.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that's where we start the education part. You start building trust with education. So if you're educating them and almost dispelling myths out there, because there is so much misinformation out there. So, Kristen, you mentioned YouTube being a big source. Who polices the information out there? Nobody really. We have to help consumers out there, and that's how you can gain trust, by getting the right information. Now, the question could come, well, how does a consumer know what's the right information or the wrong information? That's where slowly but surely, if you get your information out there on a regular basis, maybe doing YouTube videos, short videos, quick videos, and over time they see your face regularly, then you become a little bit more of that trusted resource. And I know you've spoken about that quite a bit, Kristen.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think that the more that if people could do more cost of waiting analyses, I mean, I know for me, I didn't realize how much I was losing out by waiting to buy a home, and I wasn't thinking I needed 20% because I've been in this industry, but I was thinking, well, now might not be a good time to buy, and the housing market's really crazy. And if I'd understood truly what I was losing out on, and even though I have basic, I had a lot of knowledge coming into this, seeing it for myself and what that looked like for me was a really important factor in me making the decision to actually enter the market. And it leads into one of the data points we saw was, well, a couple things. One was that 95% of millennials and Gen Z of the 1,000 respondents in this last report said that they still wanted to buy a home. So to your point, Sheree, like that, people still want this dream. But then 35% said that they thought it was just a dream. So they're feeling this is totally out of reach. And then only 19% said they thought right now was a good time to buy a home. And I think if they understood, here's what, you're not waiting till you have 20%. And you're also not like, what are you losing out on in terms of equity, growth and things like that by waiting to buy a home. And, it doesn't mean that everyone, right now is the right time for everybody. But I think people don't have all the information, to Ralph's point.
Yeah, so it's how do we get that information out there? You mentioned YouTube videos, you mentioned TikTok, which are normally short form videos as well. And I think that's the key, is getting yourself more out there with shorter videos. Don't feel that you have to solve the entire equation, if you will, in one video. 2 to 3 minutes on this topic. So it could be 2 to 3 minutes on why you don't need 20% down. 2 to 3 minutes on how do you save for a home. 2 to 3 minutes on what is PITI. Like, some people don't realize that it's not just the mortgage payment. There's taxes, there's insurance that gets added to all this. And you have to account for that. If you're a renter today, you may have renter's insurance, but you don't have taxes to pay on. You don't have all these other things that go into it. So those are little education pieces that you can add to help bring that trust, if you will, because you're educating them with key pieces that's helping them in little steps. You can even do one on what's the steps to the home buying process, from getting pre-qual to what happens when you start your application, you have a contract, letting them know what all those steps are, because it is a nerve-wracking process, like you said, Kristen, and it just, and that financial stress is always there, whether it's pre or post, buying, it's always going to be there. So how do you help with that?
Yeah. And I think there's so many ways that you can do this. We've talked about doing answers to common questions, doing some videos around that. I think it's important not to just state the education, but to do it with story. So like sharing some of the examples of, cost of waiting or rent versus own, things like that, there you can say like, here's an example of someone, blah, blah, blah. It could be a made up person, but you're giving scenarios or interviewing partners or even leaders in your community. I think weaving in the education through who you are, and that can be, a great way to build a YouTube channel and get clips for TikTok and Instagram, things like that. But yeah, that's definitely a place that people are going to for information.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the more information that you provide for them, it's never going to be a perfect time to buy a house. It's always going to be overwhelming and stressful. The biggest thing that you're going to buy in your lifetime, probably, but it's just having the knowledge and the comfortability of just taking the step and moving forward with it. Yeah. Having a support group too behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something you mentioned that kind of obviously is new because overall it's just new in our world is AI. So you mentioned that a little
Yes.
bit today. And I found that fascinating to think about. Are you thinking about or providing prompts if your clients out there or potential clients out there are using ChatGPT to ask questions? Well, then how can we help them ask the right questions? So I love that you said about using prompts. And I know you mentioned that even in our webinar that we did. And if you haven't seen the webinar, in addition to this great podcast episode we're having, just actually just scroll down where we have these podcasts and you'll find Krista's webinars on our NextGen page. And in that webinar you mentioned have prompts as well. So what are some like just simple prompts or just simple things that you feel you've seen out there from people using to help with some of those ChatGPT questions?
Right when you were talking, I was like, oh, he's going to ask this question and I am not going to know the answer to that. But it's a good question. I would like to put that out to the audience because I'm realizing that's something we should put together at First Home IQ. That's exactly the kind of education we want to provide. So I would imagine there's things that could help people through the personalization factor. Like that's what ChatGPT is so good and AI is so good with, is like making things personalized. It's not just what are the steps to buying a home. You can do that, but you can also share that with them. But I think making it so that people can run scenarios on their own, that would be a really great prompt. I don't know exactly what that looks like, and I would love to get feedback from others. I'm going to put this out to our First Home IQ community as well, and then maybe we can put this out as like a follow-up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great because I know Cherie, you've tinkered a little bit with that as well.
Yeah, the one thing I would just caution to say is don't put any personal information. Don't say
Yes.
I make this or my name is and I make this, because then it's in there and you can never get it out. So just be careful what you are putting in there. But just open-ended questions, I think that's helpful. And it's very intuitive. So you can ask questions and then ask follow-up questions to it. So it's very conversational too, which I love. And you can ask it to break it down in an easier version for you to understand. It's fantastic. Yeah, I use it.
The other thing I was going to mention is that I think it was like 44% said that they use personal finance apps. And so, making sure that you're aware of the tools that are out there. It's not just ChatGPT and AI. There's like the budgeting apps and people are going to want to have access to that kind of thing. First Home IQ partnered with FinLocker to have a First Home IQ app, and people can download that. That's a tool. But I think anything that can help personalize things for the consumer is a really great thing for people to be able to, or for you to be able to refer to them. And again, it builds that trust, empowers the consumer, and then they are able to feel like, okay, I've got some information, I can play around with this and bring it back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think a lot of times, where does one start? You Google and basically say mortgage calculator because you just want to know what the payment would be. If I'm looking in the median household in Massachusetts, I'm sure it's different where you're at in LA, Kristen, and where I'm in Georgia. So it's all different. Well, what are they looking at? They're going to go try to find what their payment is. But when you do that, the amount of options that come up is crazy, but that's only a small piece of what the whole process looks like. So like you said, and if there's some resources you have, like a rent versus own, like Kristen mentioned, or any of those other affordability calculators, offer the opportunity to sit with them and go through it with them, because that's where you're building trust. And I love it. It'll be a kind of a little segue for me, where in the report, one of the things that I found most fascinating is Gen Z, all of a sudden, their top people they're trusting are financial advisors, which I never would have thought that. And because Gen Z has this stereotype that they're not very trusting, yet financial advisors are, or that maybe they do self-investing, like because there's so many options out there to run your own investment portfolios, but they're going to financial advisors. And you think about what a financial advisor needs to do in order to build trust, understand your why, what are you looking to do? How are you trying to invest? What is your financial picture? All the questions they need to do before they can even recommend a recommendation. What are we doing on the loan side to have similar conversations and build that trust? So, Kristen, I don't know if you want to add to that, because I thought that was fascinating when I saw that.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting too. And it was so significantly more than millennials. I was just trying to look it up. And I think it was 36% of Gen Z said they were turning to financial advisors versus 25% of millennials. And that was just barely under realtors. Like it was like basically the same. Realtors and financial advisors are where Gen Z are going to, which that is a huge, I mean, millennials, it's like absolutely number one is realtors. And then, but for there to barely be a differentiator there with Gen Z is fascinating. And I think that it goes to show this desire to have that holistic picture of their finances as they're going through this process. It does, I think, coincide with the distrust in general, because they are wanting to see like, okay, how does this fit into my financial plan overall? I'm not just narrowly focused on buying a home and trusting someone who sells homes or sells loans to help me make big picture decision. And so I think again, it tells us one thing, that if loan officers are educating and empowering and helping people see the bigger picture around their finances, that's really helpful, not pushing them too hard. And then secondly, partnering with financial advisors and even giving people referrals to financial advisors. That's going to help people build trust. And then you're going to be able to get referrals from those financial advisors if you're giving them referrals too.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, especially for loan officers too, that are working with financial advisors. I mean, if you're telling a borrower to work with this person, Ralph, the loan officer, then they're going to do it. You're not competing with anybody. You're doing what your advisor's advising you to do. So,
right. Yeah. And as loan officers, then how are you partnering with financial advisors? Yeah. Because like you mentioned, Kristen, millennials are still flocking first to their realtors. That's been always where we go. And where our industry has gone. We need partnerships with realtors. Well, if Gen Z is starting to go almost even with realtors, with financial advisors, then we need to start getting in front of financial advisors. And how are you connecting with them? How are you starting to establish those relationships? And, one of the things I will say I always did, and it's something to do, I know Kristen's heard me say it a million times, I'm sure, is every time I had a loan in front of me, if somebody had a financial advisor and you provided some type of investment or stock statements or anything like that, or even retirement statements, I'd call and introduce myself and say, I'm helping our mutual customer, and at least have a form of introduction, or ask your customer to introduce you. And slowly but surely, then you can start building that relationship. Because yes, if you work in a bank, you may have a financial advisor sitting in your office. But if you're an IMB, you don't have that. So how do you get that? You rely on your network and you rely on your customers. So there's great opportunities there to expand your network and be with the right people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of Gen Z that would want to turn to a financial advisor that don't have one yet, being younger. And if you're able to build relationships with financial advisors and actually deliver referrals to them, they're going to deliver those back to you. So not just those that you've referred, but other customers, as you show them, hey, I'm bringing value to you.
Well, good stuff. I mean, my goodness, our time has flown quite quickly today, but we've knocked out a ton of great information. Cherie, anything you want to add before I kind of ask Kristen?
Kristen, you've always been such a great ambassador for millennials and home buying and home buyers. So I appreciate all your insights, and it's always great to see you. Thank you.
Yes, so good to see you guys too. And thank you again for your partnership through the years. This has been just incredible to be able to build on the research over the years, and now have 7,000 that we have been able to track and learn things from and share with the industry. So thank you guys for having me on to chat about it.
Yeah, thanks for being on with us and being our continued repeat guest. So as a reminder to everybody, if you haven't subscribed to our podcast, check out the Mortgage Mix podcast, wherever you subscribe and get your podcast from. And also make sure to follow us on YouTube on the National MI page, where we will post our podcast as well. So on behalf of Cherie and Kristen, we'll talk to you soon.